right, so this is not on your notes, but you can be on page 2 of your notes. We're just going to review what we learned yesterday. This first one says, name 2 points. How can we name a point? Let's say we wanted to name this point right here. There were 2 ways to name a point. You could just say them.
Point A.
You could say point A, or you say point, and will it be a lowercase or capital A? Capital A, and then, or you could say
A.
Just a capital A. Both are correct. Wonderful. Let's say in number 2 it says name 2 lines. If I want to name this line, we learned that we can name a line one of 2 ways. Whoop. We could say the word line. Can I use this way with the particular line we have? No, we can't. What do we need to use the word line? Like a lowercase letter. It would say like N or L or lowercase a. But we don't have that, so what did it look like to name a line? Draw a line with arrows, and then how many points go under it? 2. Okay, so name 2 points on this line. AK, you could say AB, you could say BK. It does not matter. What about for the second line? Because it says name 2 lines. There's only 2. So how would I want to name this line? CD, and then the same idea. Could I use the word line to name this line?
No.
I still can't. It does not have a lowercase letter. The last thing is to name the plane that contains point A, B, and E. How many planes are in this picture?
2.
There's 2, right? There's the bottom one and the top one. A, B, and E. A, B, and E. They're on the top plane. So there were 2 ways to name a plane. We can refresh both ways. But no matter what way you name a plane, what comes first?
Plane.
The word plane. And then option 1, we could say plane G. I could use G because is G a point?
No.
It is not. It's the name of the plane. Or I could use the word plane. And then what would I look for?
A, B, and D.
I could say A, B, E. What combination could I not say? I could not say plane A, K, B, and why can't I say that combination? They're on the same line. Could I use D to name this plane? No, because it's not on that plane. Good. And then there's one more, and then we start working on your notes. Name the highlighted line in 2 ways. So can I use the word line to name this line?
Yes.
Yes. What would the lowercase letter be? A. And then to name the line, I could use the arrows, and then what 2 points would you want to use?
Line. Oh, V.
We could say V and W, WX, something like that. What is this capital D for? It's the name of the plane. Good. So we're ready for today. We're on page 2. So a line, did it have a starting point? No. Did it have an ending point? No, it just infinitely carried in both directions. And we named it like we just reviewed, right? So we're going to learn 2 types of lines. They do have a starting point, possibly 2 starting points. All right, so I'll show you. A line segment is a blank you have. Do not write down all this information. It is way too much. A line segment is a line. So you're going to write that down. It's a line with a starting point and an ending point. It is a line with a starting point and an ending point. It is a line with a starting point and an ending point. So, when we go to name it, if you look, it's kind of already written here. It says symbolized. When we go to name it, it's very similar to naming a line, but a line has arrows going both directions. A segment does not. It's just going to be a straight line. All right, and it would look like this picture. Okay? A segment you can reverse, so you could call this AB. You could also call it BA, but it is slightly different than a line. So let's think back to a line, and it had 3 letters. Pick 3 letters that are not A, B, and C. Okay. So if I wanted to name this whole line, what are some things I could name it?
DG.
I could say DG, and that would still include the whole line. How would it still include the whole line even though it's just these 2 letters? Because of the arrows, right? Those arrows mean it continues. But segments are not that way. If I had a segment that was DGM, and I use DG, that would mean my starting point is D, and I would end at G. So would that represent the whole line? No. So the only way to name this line in particular would be D, what do you think? DM, or you could say MD. Okay? G would have to just not be in the name. So that's a segment. How do we feel about it? Feel good? All right, let's practice. AB. Could I name this particular segment AB?
Yes.
Yes. Start at A, end at B. It does include the whole line. Could I call it line AB? No, for two reasons. What are some reasons? It's not a line. Number one, it's a segment. And number two, we just learned there's one way to do it, and that's not it, right? AM. No. AM would start at A, end at M. It would not be the whole line. MB. No, same reason. BM? No. Same reason. BA? Yes, start at B, end at A. That is correct. This next one is the more complicated one to name, but it's not complicated at all. It is a ray. What are some rays that you see in real life?
Sunlight.
A sun ray. Okay, perfect. It's because you have a sun. I'll draw one, maybe. There you go. You have a sun and a ray. I'm not a scientist or a science teacher. Let me just tell you. My science teacher in high school was the football coach, you know what I mean? But they start out of nowhere and then they continue. Come on, draw it. Then they continue. That's where we're getting the idea of a ray. When you name it, you do have to be particular. But let's start with defining it. A ray has a start/end point. So you can call it both. Start/end point. And then it goes infinitely in the other direction. So it has a start/end point. And then it goes infinitely in the other direction. Has a start/end point. Then it goes infinitely in the other direction. You probably won't mind definition on theirs. Start/end point goes infinitely in the other direction. I call it a starting point. Your textbook calls it an end point. It does not matter. But you can see that there's one point, right, like an end point, and then it goes, it's like a segment and a line. They had a baby, and they named it Ray, okay? When you name it, you do have to be particular in two ways. When you name it, so you know a line, you name like this, right? A segment, you just name like this. A ray, you're going to use an arrow, and it will point to the right. It does not matter what the picture of the ray looks like. When you name it, this arrow will point to the right. The second thing that matters is the first letter that you list has to be the starting point. So those are the two things that have to happen. Your arrow will point to the right, and then you'll list your starting point first. So what's the starting point of this ray? A, and then it goes infinitely in the direction of B. You cannot reverse the letters. So here's what I mean. AB is not the same as BA. If I write BA, what did we say the first letter was? The starting point. So if I say BA, that means the starting point was B, and then I went in the direction of A. So they are not the same thing. You cannot reverse them. Okay, and then I think it'll show you officially. So starting point A. With lines, you can. Line AB and line BA are the same. Segment AB and segment BA are the same, but their rays will not be the same. So here the starting point would be B. That makes sense? So even though this bottom ray is technically pointing to the left, when we name it, what direction does the arrow have to point? Right. To the right. Okay? So if you want to write that down, I would recommend it. When you name it, the arrow always points to the right. So when you name it, the arrow always points to the right. So an arrow pointing to the right, and then you list the starting point and then the other point. And then we will practice. So this first one says TS. Why?
Because S is the starting point.
Correct. This says T is the starting point, but in our picture, S is the starting point. So that one would not be correct. Another word you might see is initial. It also means starting point. It does not matter what you call it. Ray, ST? No, never seen that in my life. Don't use the word ray. TS with the arrow pointing to the left. No, why not? Yeah, the arrow's pointing to the left and it needs to point to the right. So it's not correct. ST. Yes, the arrow is pointing to the right. S is listed first. This one is the correct way to name a ray. So those are rays. Now we're going to talk about a particular type. No, we're going to review it first and then talk about a particular type. Let's start here with a line. We're going to draw the endpoints or the arrows on each type of line, and then we're going to write how to name them. So with this line, first of all, do we have endpoints or do we have arrows? Arrows. So our line is going to go through the 2 points and have arrows on both sides. You didn't know you were going to play Connect the Dots today in math class, but here we are. When we name it, have arrows above. What can I name this one? QR. Can I reverse it? Yes, RQ. All right, the next one's a segment, so what are we going to do there? Just connect the dots, yep. Some people try to extend past. Don't. Just right between them. When you name it, just straight line above, and then what do we put? QR, or we can put RQ. These next two are rays, and we're going to do both directions. For this first one, just pick a starting point. That's fine, Q. So we're going to start at Q and go in the direction of R, and then we're going to name it. When you name a ray, what direction does the arrow go? Right. To the right. And then what's my first letter going to be? Q. And then the second will be R. Then the last one, we're going to do the opposite direction. So the first one we started with Q. The second one we'll start with R and go towards Q. So my arrow's kind of pointing to the left. But when I name it, where does my arrow point? Right. To the right. And then what will be my starting point? R and then Q. Good. We learn about one more geometry thing, and then we kind of move into a little algebra. We're going to talk about opposite rays. There's a reason why this is important. Later on, you're going to learn about linear pairs and things like that, and they're built off of opposite rays, which is why we're going to learn the term today. If you see, it says opposite rays on the top of page 3, and then it says 1, 2, 3. There are 3 things that makes an opposite ray an opposite ray, so we're going to fill that in. If you look, it says C is between A and B. What does between mean?
In the middle.
In the middle. It's in the middle of A and B. Then CA. So I'm going to draw CA. What is the starting point for CA? C, and then it goes towards A. And then the second one is CB. What's the starting point for CB? C, and it goes in the direction of B. So these two are opposite rays, and they're opposite rays for 3 reasons. The first one is that they are collinear. So go ahead and write that down in your first blank. Opposite rays, number 1, they're collinear, which means that they are on the same line, right? So opposite rays are collinear. Number 2, they have the same end point. You can call this starting point, end point, however you want to do it. But what was the end point for both rays? A C. And then the last thing is that they go in opposite directions. Opposite directions. So when we say opposite, we mean exact opposite. What is the opposite of left? Right. To the right, up, down, north, south, east. West. So when we say this, it should really look like a straight line. Are these two going to go in opposite directions? No, they're not far opposite. Okay, they got to be complete opposite directions. So, and then the last thing, this is saying that rays can be collinear if they're on the same line. That's all. ED and EF. So by your eyes, do they look like they're opposite rays?
No.
All right, let's go through the list. Are they collinear?
No.
No. Are D, E, and F on the same line? They are not. So these are not opposite rays. Do they have the same endpoint? Yes, they both have. E. The last one that they would have also failed is, do they go in opposite directions? No. They don't. They have to go completely opposite. So that one would also be incorrect. So those are not SR and ST. So let's look. SR, what's my ending point for SR? S, and I go towards R. And then for ST, I start at, and I go towards T. So are they collinear? Yes. Do they have the same endpoint? Yes, it's S. And then do they go in opposite directions? Yes. So are these opposite rays? Yes. They are. Wonderful time. So this is what a problem would look like on like a test or a quiz. We're going to start with A. Give another name for GH. What kind of line is GH that they've named? It's a segment. So they want us to rename this exact segment, GH. Right? They started at G and ended at H. So does anybody have a wild guess as to what we would name it? Go for it, Braden.
HG.
You are absolutely correct. HG, and then what would it look like above? Straight line. That's it. I will say, we can go off to the side for a second, especially because this is an honors class. You are going to have a different type of question, and it would say, give another name for ray, we'll say GH. Can ray GH be renamed as HG? No, it cannot. Could it just flip the whatever and do GH? No, absolutely not. So this problem is tricky to some people, but I'm going to teach you how to do it. Ready? GH, what's the starting point for GH? I start at G and I go in the direction of H. I want to have a ray that does the same thing, but it can't have the same exact letters. So I want to start in the same place, right? So what would my starting point have to be? G. And I want to go in the same direction, but I can't list H again, or I did not rename it. So does anybody have a guess as to what letter you would use? Go for it.
J.
You would use J. So G, J. Which brings me to a point. J is a point. In geometry, and at least in your textbook, anytime multiple lines intersect, you'll see a letter there. They will not put a dot here because it just adds to the chaos. So if you ever see lines intersecting and you see a letter off to the side, this is naming the point where they intersect. So J is the point where these two lines intersect. You can always draw a dot if you don't like the way it looks. But GJ would be the answer. So knowing that, can anybody guess? We'll do it again because I could see some of your faces. What is another name for ray EJ? So you want to start in the same place and go in the same direction. What is it?
EF.
Correct. So ray EJ and ray EF would be the same. They start at the same place and they both go towards the right. You'll need to be able to do that for your quiz. Any questions? Okay. All right, so we're going to name some rays with the endpoint J. So again, J is a point, it's just in the middle. What is one ray with the endpoint J? First of all, what will my first letter be in this ray then?
J.
J. So just pick a ray. J. F. Wonderful. JF is one of them. Pick another.
JE.
J. I heard JE, and I also heard JE, and then I also heard JH. Both are correct. There's one more.
JG.
JG is correct. JG. And then it says which of these are opposite rays. So what was opposite with JF? JF and JE. And that means that JH is opposite with JG. I will tell you that on your quiz, it would most likely just ask you which rays are opposite rays, because this is a lot to write and it's a lot to read. So I'd be more prepared for the second half. All right. So that's kind of the end of most geometry. for this section. This part's it's reviewing inequalities. We're going to graph it and then decide what we graphed, if it looked like a segment, a ray, a line, or a point. That's it. So when you're graphing, all I ask is that you have at least 3 numbers plotted. So 1, 2, 3. This is a number line. All right. What number should we have plotted in A? We should have 1, and then I would just go up 1 and down 1. So it says x equals 1. There's not an inequality, so what you're going to do is put a dot at 1. X is 1. And that's it. So what we graphed, was it a segment, ray, point, or a line? It was a point. Get in the habit of showing me your answer. You can box it if that's what the habit you're in. You can circle it. You can highlight it. Just make sure that I know what the answer is. Okay. The second one, we have an inequality. Is this a less than or a greater than? It's a less than. It's a less than or equal to. So we're going to pause for a second. Let's talk about this. On some of these, you'll put an open dot, and some of them you'll do a closed. And here's the difference. If I said, how many of you have less than 2 siblings? Does that include people who have 2 siblings? No. It includes people who have none or 1. So anytime you see less than or greater than, it does not include the number that we're saying. So if we said x is less than 2, it will not include the number 2, Jack. So you got to do an open circle. If it says or equal to, if I said, how many of you have 2 or less siblings, that would include the number 2, correct? So you would close the dot. So here, are we going to have an open or closed dot? We're going to have a closed. All right, let's draw our 3 numbers. What do you think the 3 numbers will be? Correct. So 3 numbers. We are going to have a closed dot. Since x is on the left, we can shade in the direction of the arrow. It's pointing to the left, so we're going to shade to the left. I shade like this. It looks like a hot mess. Some of you shade like this. That is fine. Saw somebody do like a weird rainbow. That's also fine. I don't care. Just make sure that I know where you're shading. Questions on this one? Okay. Did what we graph, does it look like a segment, array, a point, or a line? Array. It is array. Array. All right. Then letter C. This one looks the most complicated. It doesn't have to be. The 2 things that I would plot on the ends would actually be -1 and 7. And then I would just pick a number between them and plot it. I picked 2 for whatever reason. So, first of all, on these numbers, do either of these signs have a or equal to? No. So we know they're going to be open dots. We just don't know if we're going to shade out or shade in. So what I like to do, this is 2 different inequalities, right? We'll start with the first one. We have -1 is less than x. Is this written correctly? No, not for us to shade. So I'm going to flip it. When you flip it, you need to make sure you flip the sign as well. The open part is near the x. The open part stays near the x. So the less than turns into a greater than. The second part is already written correctly. X is less than 7. Are we okay? We just unstacked it. So now we can shade. We know x is greater than -1. So this part would shade bigger than -1. But this part, in red, x is less than 7, would shade less than 7. So you're going to shade all in the middle, in between. So just make sure you fill in all the way from -1 to 7. And then what does this look like? A segment, array, a point, a line? Segment. It is a segment. Wonderful. All right, and then the last three, they're more algebra involved. They're all going to end up looking like the same shape. But before we get there, letter B, go ahead and replace it. It copied letter A, and it shouldn't be there. So you can cross out the one that you have and then write in what we're going to do, m over 3 right here. M over 3 minus 3 is less than or equal to -6. Does anybody know the rule that's written in bold here? There's only one rule with inequalities that make it different than an equation. Does anybody remember? What is it?
It's like if you multiply or divide by negative, you can switch the sign.
Correct. So if you multiply, I'm sorry the line is probably not big enough for you to say it, or divide, the only thing I'll add is say both sides by a negative, then you will flip the sign. So if you multiply or divide both sides by a negative, you will flip the sign. If you multiply or divide both sides by a negative, you will flip the sign. So a less than would turn into a greater than and vice versa. One other thing to remember, this is, you solve it similar to an equation. So remember the thing you learned, don't call after midnight. Does anybody remember what C stood for? Oh, sorry, C does stand for combine. I meant D. D stands for? Distribute. So we're going to distribute first, and then combine like terms. And then what did A stand for? Add and subtract. M stands for? Multiply or divide. Wonderful. So in this first one, do we have anything to distribute? We do not. But we do have C, combine like terms, right? So it is the beginning of the year, and you guys just had summer. So a lot of people forget when to do the opposite sign. You don't do the opposite unless you want to get to the opposite side of the equal sign. These two are on the same side, so you're literally going to combine them. -3 minus 6 makes -9. Good. I want 3x by itself, so I have to move that -9. How do I move it across the equal sign? I'm going to add 9 to cancel it on the right. So I have 9 is greater than 3x. And then my next step, divide by 3. I'm not dividing by a negative, so I just copy everything down as is. You can circle it this way, but again, I would change it so you could graph. Because this way you might graph wrong, right? So I would flip them around, put x on the left and 3 on the right. So my greater than sign will turn into a less than sign. How we doing? Make sure you circle or box or something, indicate that's your answer. Are we going to have an open or closed circle? Open, and we'll shade to the left. Wonderful. Any questions on this first one? Good. The second one, we can start over. Do we have any distributing? No. Do we have any combining like terms? No, so that leads us to adding and subtracting. M looks weird, right? What's happening to M? It's a fraction. It's being divided by 3. We need to get that by itself before we can do anything about it. So how can I move that -3 across the equal sign? Add 3. So M over 3 is less than or equal to -6 plus 3 is close. It is -3. You're good. All right, and then M is being divided by 3. To cancel that out, what is the opposite of dividing by 3? Multiplying by 3. Perfect. So M is less than or equal to, because we're not multiplying both sides by a negative, it's just +3. What is -3 times 3?
-9.
In -9. I don't need to flip this one around. M is on the left, which is nice. We're going to plot 3 points. So we'll have -9. What is less than -9? -10. And then more than -9 is negative 8. All right, we're going to have an open or a closed dot. Close, and we'll shade to the left. All right, this is the last one we do. I picked this one because some students' instinct is correct, and some students' instinct is what you do not want to do. Can anybody guess what we do want to do? We want to distribute. What do we not want to do? We do not want to combine like terms yet. A lot of people will look at this and be like, oh, 3 minus 2 is 1. Don't do it. We want to distribute. We're just going to drop down the 3. Can you see this yellow? I'll change it. We'll drop down the 3, but we can distribute that negative 2. When you distribute, make sure you distribute into both parts of the parenthesis. What is minus 2 times n? Negative 2n. Then minus 2 times minus 4? Positive 8. And that is greater than or equal to negative 1. So we have distributed. Can we combine any like terms?
Yes.
Yes. We have 3 and positive 8. So 3 plus 8 is? I'm going to write it first. I don't care what order you write it in. You could put 11 minus 2n, or you could put minus 2n plus 11. It does not matter to me. I had someone ask earlier. But again, our goal is to get n by itself. So how do I move that positive 11? I'm going to subtract it. So then I have minus 2n is greater than or equal to negative 12. So the next thing I do is very important. So what am I going to do? I'm going to divide by a negative 2. And what did we say we do when we divide by a negative? You flip that sign. So now it's going to be n. It's not greater than. It will be less than. And then minus 12 divided by minus 2. Positive 6. All right, and then we're going to have 6, 5, 6, 7. Am I going to have an open or a closed circle? Closed. And man, again, I shade to the left. Sometimes we shade to the right, I promise. We're going to take out our whiteboards and do that for the remainder. You get out at 12:15. Do you have a marker? If you don't, come get one. How many is it? Don't? A lot? Oh my gosh, a lot. Okay. I'll come to you then. You do need one? All right. We'll see how many of these work. Actually, give him the orange. It was closer. I won't be able to read that far. Oh, my lines are good. All right, when do you have to have your markers by? You're making me break into the new ones already.
Huh?
You're making me break into the new ones. I'm working on it, buddy. What do you look like? There's one right there. Let's be proactive. It's broken? Okay, so what do we do with broken things?
Oh.
Who sits there? Oh, she switched. You're going to tell me that every day till Jack. Okay, I'm black for you.
What are you doing?
The ones I just handed out, I super want back. Because that's like fresh out of a box. Alright, ready? When were you planning on telling me? Oh, a whiteboard? Go, just go get one. Alright, ready? You're going to draw. And I'm going to get away from Jack so I'm not in his face. Well, maybe. Find one. Wonderful. Make sure you use capital letters for points. What you got, bud? What you doing? Don't tell me
Just flip it.
All right, ready? Focus. All right, so you should have a line with 2 endpoints. That's it. Next one, you're going to write on your board. You're going to tell me if it's a line, ray, or segment, and then you're going to name it. Then you're going to name it. You do both sometimes. Man alive. You do both at the same time? Is that what you did? We're going to have to do erasers. Good. Good. You don't put a dot on it. No. Yes.
Oh, you want
The second drawing, you have to go more about drawing out.
I feel like some
You're bad.
Don't put a dot.
It's just 3 lines.
Yeah, that's
No.
fine.
Good. All right, it is a ray. What's the starting point for this ray? And it goes in the direction of y. Wonderful. This next one, you're going to solve and then graph it and then tell me what kind of shape it is. Did that one not work either?
No,
Oh, you have to wipe it off.
It kind of worked, but it made the board really wet.
Yeah.
So it's the one that right on the board.
Well, don't.
No,
We'll make it worse. Correct. Correct. Not quite. Well, this part. And then show me how you shape. Good. 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 You're right. Super strong. Good. Alright, good. Why'd you flip your sign? Yeah. It was greater than, but you didn't divide that.
But you, same thing as you.
Alright, so you should get x is
10.
well greater than or equal to 10. And then what direction do you shade?
Right.
To the right. Is my dot open or closed? Closed. And then to the right. Name the highlighted segment. Focus. What's highlighted in yellow? This little part in the middle. Correct. 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 Oh. Segment.
Oh, wait.
So you can take a line and cut it into a segment. I told you it's a segment. You gotta name the segment. That's correct.
It's the third time I've done this.
You're out of your name.
All three of you are correct. Wonderful. All right, next one. Is it a line, ray, or segment? And then name it. Wow. Don't say the answer out loud, dear. All right, and then you got to name it too. It is indeed a segment, and then you say ED with a line above it, or DE, either way. Name 3 collinear points. Three collinear points. Make sure when you're listing things, what do you put between things you list? You put a comma. Correct. You named all 3 sets. That's good. You also named all 3 sets. So you need to put that comma, that comma, that comma. You named 3 sets. That's good. You named 2 sets. That's good. And you named 3 sets. I just wanted 3 points that were collinear. That's good. So a lot of you are a lot correct. You could say M. I'm talking. You're not. M-N-O. Or you could say H, N, K, or I. There's a random letter down there. Or you could say J, K, and L. When you list them, you put a comma between them. Let's do this one. It's a little harder. what did you have to do first? Good. You had to distribute. So when you distribute, you get minus 3p. Minus 3 is less than or equal to negative 18. After you add 3, you end up with negative 3p is less than or equal to negative 15. Then what do I do? Divide by negative 3. This is a big deal, right? Because what do we do next?
Flip the sign.
We're going to flip the sign. So p will end up being greater than or equal to 5. Do I have an open or closed circle?
Close.
Close, and then I shade to the
Right.
right. Perfect. All right, so next one, draw OP. Correct. Correct. Good. 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 Just make sure you have a second point for the second letter. These are all good. The letter P. You see the point. It's good. Good. Good, good, good. Make sure your line doesn't extend past that point. So you have O as your starting point, and then you go in the direction of P. All right, is it a line, ray, or segment? And then name it. Correct. Not quite. Not quite. Correct. Not quite. Correct. 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 Correct, 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 correct. Woo. Okay, good. So our starting point, I think yours is good. Yeah. Your starting point is L. Arrow pointing to the right. Starting point is L. You go in the direction of M. Name the highlighted ray. So is this yellow right here? Correct. Good. 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 Wonderful. It was this class that we finished 2 truths and a lie?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, we can end on this one. So the answer is EB, arrow pointing to the right.